I want to touch just for a moment or two on something that we were talking about last week. I want to just finish up the discussion. If you would, turn to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 14. 1 Thessalonians 5:14. We were talking last week about having a positive attitude, positive outlook, and so forth. Having a reasonable outlook toward the future, recognizing that sometimes things don't always work out. I just think it's important for us to remember that some people have a little trouble interpreting their lives in a really positive way. Maybe they're going through something very difficult. And I think we need to be careful how we deal with people like that so that they aren't totally discouraged. I've always liked what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 5:14. We exhort you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle, comfort the discouraged, help the weak, be patient with everyone. That just seems to me to be really good advice when people are dealing with their own struggles. Maybe they're a half-empty glass type of person, just have trouble seeing the positive in things. So I just want to encourage us to think about that as you deal with people who are going through things like that. I think it's important for us to just stand beside them. I think that's probably about the best thing we can do, just to give them the recognition that they're not going through anything by themselves. Anyway, I just thought about that after class was over and thought it wouldn't be a bad thing for us to remember. Last week we talked about the future. Today we're going the other direction. We want to talk about the past. In Exodus chapter 1, verse 8, the Old Testament says that a new king arose in Egypt who did not know Joseph. Don't know if that was historical amnesia. Don't know if the time frame was well beyond what he had learned. Don't know whether he hadn't learned that in Egyptian school, whatever that was. The fact is, he forgot. He didn't realize part of what had happened in the past. In Judges chapter 2 and verse 10, it says that a new generation arose in Israel who did not know the works God had done. What happened? Anybody know? Yeah, Roger?
They did not know Joseph. Doesn't mean they weren't aware of him. A lot of people who are aware of God, maybe the Israelites were too, but they didn't know him.
Sort of a practical kind of atheism type of approach. Yeah.
They were taught.
Nothing.
This info wasn't handed down to them.
Yeah. It's kind of mysterious, isn't it? Because at least in the book of Joshua and Judges, that period there, it seems like there was a whole generation who did know the works of God. That whole generation after Joshua was faithful after he died. But another generation came along, and for some reason, I suppose we could speculate and try to figure out what exactly happened. We know it happened. We know that somehow there was an, I don't know if you want to call it an information gap, whether it was they didn't, like Roger seemed to be insinuating, maybe they knew but didn't really care. Maybe it didn't make any difference in their lives. Is that what you were suggesting, Roger?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's like we learn about the Depression, but it doesn't affect us. We didn't live through it. Our grandparents were probably the last generation that lived through the Depression. And so, yes, we hear about it, but it doesn't make an impression as to what actually happened.
Wasn't our personal experience, you think?
Yes.
Is that why? Okay. Janet's mom used to talk about what they did during the Depression, so had some unique things they did just to get stuff, to survive. was it the one thing she used to say? They get old newspapers and fold them over and put them in their shoes when their shoes had holes. And it worked for maybe a day, because the paper would run through. That's what they had to do. So just interesting bits of the past. Let's talk a little bit. I want to do two things. I want to talk about some of the questions in the book first, and then I want to actually go into the text of 1 Samuel 12 in particular, because I think that's the one where Samuel reminds them of their history in 1 Samuel 12, and I think that provides some interesting discussion for us. But first of all, first question was, talk about your family history. Which family members influenced you the most? Most of us would probably say our parents. That's okay. I mean, who would you say influenced you the most in your family? And if you want, think of somebody outside of your parents, but it's up to you. So what would you say? And how was it they influenced you? With what ideas and how did they do it? Yeah, Roger.
Well, of course my parents, but I would say my grandmothers on both sides. Just amazing. Godly women, and gave so freely of themselves and what they had, what little they had, they gave freely. But I guess maybe my Uncle Harry had a huge influence, because when I was finishing up high school, I didn't know what I was going to do. My best friend said, I'm never going to any more school at all. He was kind of negative on school, and that impacted me. But Uncle Harry said, no sir, you're going to go to college, and you're going to go to a Christian college. I said,
I am?
I don't know how to do that, Uncle Harry. I don't have any money. Well, you come and stay with me in New Mexico for the summer. I'll make sure you got a job. You can live with us, and you go back and you enroll. And so I said, okay.
Somebody took you under their wing. That's
Well,
great.
he did.
That's
He
a
did.
great story.
Nobody else had ever given me any encouragement for that.
Huh.
I was the first in my family to really, other than we've been at ACC for a year or two, but
Nobody else had ever actually finished?
no.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Okay. So Uncle Harry for you. Yeah, nice. But the rest of you? Yeah, Dan.
Think about my grandmother, my mom's mom. I was raised in a very strong Catholic background, and my grandmother had two brothers that were priests. So she was very strong.
I never knew that about you, Dan.
Yeah, it's
interesting to know.
My mother, when I became a Christian, and I tried to explain to her that I was baptized, my mother just was very upset at me. Not happy at all that I would leave the Catholic Church, but my grandmother took interest, even invited me in her home to sit down so I could tell her about what I had learned about God. And she never said anything about that I was going the wrong way or anything. She just wanted to know how my relationship with God had changed. And so that had stuck with me to think, when people find God, even if we don't see eye to eye, it's a good thing. And they'll learn, as I did. I learned more about God as I was into His Word.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, back here.
My older brother became a New Testament Christian before I did. So he came home, spouting the whole baptism thing, instrumental music thing. I called him an eccentric, but that was that led to the
Were you
scripture.
guys raised in a denomination? You're raised in Christian, or were you raised in something else?
We were raised Episcopalian, so
Okay.
not just this side of Dan, I've worn a cassock, I've been in a choir, I was even ordained a deacon,
Okay,
as a teenager, mind you.
okay.
But aside from, so that was my brother that influenced me in a big way before I became a Christian. And then after I became a Christian, when I was a new Christian, Rebecca's dad, Rebecca wasn't even in the picture at that time. Rebecca's dad, who had a Bible study in their home, and was one of the elders in the congregation that I was worshiping at, he had a big influence on me.
Okay. So it sounds like a lot of your influences led you to spiritual things. Okay. Did you ever say in your life, I'll never do what my mom or dad did, but later in life you did those things? Come on now, let's be honest. Yes, Jim?
No, I was just gonna say amen to that.
Okay. You know, whether we like it or not, we're products of the past. In some ways, at least. Maybe we've been able to look back and say, well, maybe I haven't done some of those things, but we're still products of the people we've been around, the experiences we've had, the family that we come from. I know when people go into counseling degrees, they have to get people to think about that. You know, why is it I behave the way I behave? You know, just think about the differences that two people bring to a relationship. It's part of that is your family history. Those things in the past, they make a difference. You have a different perspective than people who grew up in Russia because you grew up in the United States of America. Those things make a big difference. Does anybody else want to share their family experience, or somebody who had a profound effect on them? A teacher, perhaps. Does anybody have a teacher that they remember was the one teacher that had the most effect on them? Yeah.
I actually had a couple of ladies that were my Bible class teachers. One when I was younger, elementary years, and every birthday she would make a cake for the student and we would celebrate. And it was something big for us because we didn't really get that from our immediate families a lot. And so somebody remembering our birthday, and taking the time every year to do that, something that stuck with me. And then teenage years, had another sister that kind of started holding us accountable. When you're a teenager, you don't want to be accountable for anything, but her model, when we wouldn't have our work done for Bible class, she would give us homework, and she would say, "Excuses are tools of a fool." And that's something, is it a reason or is it an excuse? She would ask, and so that's kind of stuff that sticks with me, as an adult. Am I making excuses or are they reasons?
Yeah. I had a teacher like Dan and several others in here. My wife and I both grew up Catholic, and I went to a Catholic high school. Father Cullen, my second year English teacher, is the guy I remember the most. I just liked the guy. I don't know if that's why I ended up getting into writing and English and so forth, but he was just a fun guy to be around. But he was one of these guys that would come in for about the first 5 minutes of class. He'd tease us. He'd talk about the previous football game the day before. He loved the Giants. He remembered Y.A. Tittle, if you're old enough to remember Y.A. Tittle for the Giants. He'd come in and talk about that poor guy riding around in his wheelchair behind the center. He'd just tease. 5 minutes later, it was like, okay, now it's time to work. You were talking, I want 500 words tomorrow on my desk why you shouldn't talk once we begin class. I mean, he was boom, boom, boom. He was a great guy, but he was very strict and he demanded a lot from us. I don't know, that for some reason that struck home with me. I think I needed somebody to be, give me a little bit of a strong hand. So just an very interesting guy. Question 2 was, what experiences have been important turning points in your life? Let's see. Did those things change your life in ways you never expected? Were they positive or negative experiences? Who's got something to share with us? Can you remember? I'm trying to see if I'm getting too far ahead here. All right. Let's maybe think of it this way. Can you remember where you were when a major event took place?
JFK and 9/11.
Okay. I can remember exactly where I was for both of those things.
I can remember. I can almost see it with JFK. I mean, I know exactly what I was doing, where I was going.
Yeah, I would often. Let's see. I was 15. sometimes when I would get home from high school, I'd lay down on the couch, I'd take a little nap after high school, after I got back from class. I woke up with the radio on, hearing it, yes, it is true, the president is dead. I'm like, what? You mean I just woke up from a nap and that's the very first thing I hear? That was bizarre. I can remember that. I can remember where I was when I heard about the planes running into the Twin Towers. In fact, we have a picture of me and when my boys were little standing on top of one of the Twin Towers. I still have that picture. It's very interesting. But you know where you were. So, share some experiences with me. What are the experiences you've had that had a profound effect on your life? Yeah, Jim.
When this building was finally finished and ready to go about 1982, a year or two later we got a letter in Spanish from a Mayan preacher, wannabe preacher, who had a wife and a little baby, and he needed support. And so it was handed me because I knew Spanish. And I interested some of the brethren in just giving, some support, but not much. And later on, the church itself took that as a mission in Yucatan. And from that one little family, about 6 or 7 congregations going strong. And the second, third generation are getting into it and so forth. So, just small things like that you don't think much of to start with can really grow into something wonderful.
I asked about a major event. That didn't seem major at the time, did
No.
it? No, it didn't. So any event that had a profound effect on your life, small or big. Jan?
Well, this is a person that I met on the train going to Baltimore, and I had been studying Russian history, and I saw this little woman getting on the train as well. She's all draped in black, all black. Very reminded me, reminiscent of a peasant, Eastern European, and I thought, I've got to go over and talk to her somehow. I've got to get over and talk to her. And my feeling was I wanted to just ask her some things, but when I sat down with her, I was so impressed with this woman. She was she looked like say a piece of coal, but I was kind of unearthing a diamond. And she had such extraordinary things happen to her. She was in a camp because her father was wealthy when she was younger. I realized by her age she would have been in Russia about 1917. So immediately I knew she had a wealthy background. I knew she was in trouble. And so she just began to tell me the story of her life. And here I had all these historical facts, but then when I was faced with this person, it knocked me over. I mean, she had a number on her arm, and she was starved, and but the thing that got me about her was that she was so positive and such a cheerful person. And I said, Magdalena, how in the world are you so? I mean, we got to that point in 2 hours of discussion where she was talking very openly. I said, how are you so positive? She goes, I just had such a good early life that I held on to those early memories. And when bad things were happening to me, I just put them out of my mind and I thought about the good things. Whatever's good, whatever's noble, whatever's trustworthy. And I think she just knocked me over.
Yeah, we've talked about that many times. That's very interesting. And, I mean, if nothing else, she could tell you some history. She could tell
She
you
was
that.
history.
She was history. Yeah, she was history. Does anybody else in here like to read good books on history? I don't mean history textbooks that are usually boring. They're boring. But books about a particular event or a particular time period or a person in history. Anybody else like to read those? Rick, what's one that has really had a profound effect on your thinking?
Well, I don't know if it was a profound effect on my thinking, but I realized after reading it how fragile everything was, but the book The Mayflower was written by a guy that I like the way he writes, and it was very complete history, but it just, you know, you can see God's providence in everything that took place, because for all of those events to blend together the way they did is nothing short of amazing. And so I think I walked away from that, if nothing else, saying, yep, you know, God had his hand in this all the way through.
Okay. We need to think, yeah, go ahead.
I lived a very comfortable life, not rich or anything, but very comfortable as a child. And I had loving parents, loving Christian parents. And I married and had a good husband, lived a comfortable life. And it has always amazed me when I talk to people who they tell me their story about how they're abused or how, you know, their parents didn't love them, you know, that kind of thing. And that's always had an effect on me. And also, after I moved here, I took a trip to Haiti. Just one trip, but that was enough to make me realize how very blessed I am here. And it changed my thinking a lot in how I look at other people, how I look at the world, how much we have here, and we don't even think about it sometimes.
Yeah.
And that was that had quite a profound effect upon me.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. So you had an experience that helped you to be really thankful. Yeah, okay.
Very.
Yeah, right here.
Anything I've read about World War II? It's about the Holocaust and
Yeah, I've met.
the history and everything that happened.
Yeah,
Those people.
yeah. I've met and interviewed a number of veterans who fought in the war, and it's amazing the stories that they tell you about their experiences and how it affected them. Okay, I want to go on to another question. I'm going to try to fit all this in, okay? But I think these questions are important based on the topic here, based on looking toward the past, okay? I mentioned in question 3, which I don't know why I didn't mention the individual's name. How many, I know I'm going to date some of you like this. How many of you remember a news commentator named Eric Sevareid? Yeah. I remember Eric Sevareid. I remember I don't know why I remember this one particular quote. He was the one who said, there will always be a generation gap because the older generation can remember the past, but the younger generation only knows the present. Which is too bad, but you know, unless we teach them about the past, and unless maybe those of us who have been around a little bit longer try to teach them about that. And quite frankly, I think that's part of what grandparents do in the family, isn't it? They sort of keep the past alive for people, for the next generation, remind them of things. What do you think about that? Is it just too obvious to have much discussion about? Are there certain things that you would want the next generation to know in your family or in your circle of friends? Yes?
Well, when I read that question, this might be a bit of a departure, but when I read that question, it led me to think that the younger generation, although they live in the present, are mostly focused on the future, you know, what's coming at them. Either they want a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or they want a career, or they're interested in this or that.
Yeah.
And so the present is sort of this, you know, it's there, it's real, but they're really focused on something else.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And so that was a thought that came to my mind. I don't know if that builds into your lesson or
Oh,
not.
it does. Very much it does. I mean, that's part of the problem that I think we see in 1 Samuel. So why don't we use that as a segue? I mean, no, it's been 25 minutes and we haven't got to the text yet, but I do want to do that. So let's turn to 1 Samuel chapter 12. Samuel's history lesson. Interesting features of this history lesson. By the way, are you aware that the New Testament writers and speakers do the same thing? In Acts chapter 3, Peter does that when he reminds the people of what God has been doing up to this point. Stephen does it in fact, this is probably the longest single speech in the New Testament, other than maybe the Sermon on the Mount. But he does that, and he gives it a very negative twist. You know, you guys have been always resisting the Holy Spirit, but he goes through the history of God's people. That negative twist doesn't gain him any friends. Actually gets him killed. But the fact is, he gives them a history lesson. Paul does the same thing in Acts chapter 13. Paul's first missionary journey. He gives them some history, reminds them of why they're there and who they are as a people. Okay? That's what history does for us. So Samuel is going to do essentially the same thing here. He's going to add a little bit of a negative twist to it as well. 1 Samuel chapter 12. First of all, Samuel's about to retire here, isn't he? It says, I believe it's verse 2. Yeah, verse 2. Now you can see that the king is leading you. As for me, I am old and gray, and my sons are here with you. I've led you from my youth until now. So he's on his way out. I think Samuel's doing something that I believe the Apostle Paul does in 2 Timothy. When he's about ready to be gone, he gives Timothy those things that are probably the most important things for him to remember. Okay? You know, sort of your parting shot. What are the few things that I want you to remember the most? Because I'm not going to be here after this. Peter does it in 2 Peter as well. He says, I think it's good for me to keep reminding you of these things. One of these days I'm not going to be here. So Samuel does this right now. He wants them to remember, let's see. Look at verses 6 and 7. Who has chapter 12, verses 6 and 7? Read those. Somebody read that for me.
Then Samuel said to the people, "It is the Lord who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your ancestors up out of Egypt. Now then, stand here, because I am going to confront you with the evidence before the Lord as to all the righteous acts performed by the Lord for you and your ancestors."
So what is his purpose? What is he trying to do here? What does he want them to remember?
He wants them to go back to their faith in the Lord.
Okay. Wants them to remember what God has done for them. Do you guys have to do that when things aren't going so well? You kind of have to remember what he has done. Think about some of the events and people that you talked about earlier. Are you grateful for those things? From some of the things you told me, I would have to say, yes, you are. You're very grateful for those particular things. Maybe there's negative events that you're also grateful for. In this case, Samuel says, just remember what God's done for you. Don't forget these things. And then he goes on. I'll take a reader also for verses 8 through 10, please.
After Jacob entered Egypt, they cried to the Lord for help, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your forefathers out of Egypt, settled them in this place. But they forgot the Lord their God. He sold them into the hand of Sisera, the commander of the army of Hazor, and into the hands of the Philistines and the king of Moab, who fought against them. They cried out to the Lord and said, "We have sinned. We have forsaken the Lord and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. But now, deliver us from the hands of our enemies, and we will serve you."
Okay, so what happened? What's this historical event about? And what is he? How does Samuel interpret it for them?
When you forgot about God, very bad things happen to you.
Okay, what's the first thing he reminds them in verse 8? Try verses 8 and 9. Yeah, verse 8. What does God do for them, first of all?
Delivers them from Egypt.
Yeah, he delivers them from Egypt. How can you guys forget the Exodus? Okay? How could you guys, there's a real interesting thing, I think it's Exodus 14, that after they come through the Red Sea, it says they all look back and they could see all the dead bodies on the shore. And then, very soon after that, what did they start doing? They started complaining. And it's like, guys, don't you remember the dead bodies? You saw those things. Anyway, that's what I would want to say to them. But yet Moses and Aaron, he sent Moses and Aaron to you guys. And he brought you out. He made you free. What did you do? Grumble? What does Samuel say they did? Yeah, just forgot God. Now, between the lines here, I think Samuel's saying, are you going to do that again? Doesn't have to say it. I think he implies it. How about verses 11 through 12? Again, somebody read for us. By the way, you see, this is a history lesson, isn't it? Verses 11 and 12.
Then the Lord sent Jerubbaal, man, I hate these names, Jerubbaal and Bedan and Japhath and Samuel, and delivered you from the hands of your enemies all around, so that you lived in security.
And verse 12?
When you saw that Nahash, the king of the sons of Ammon, came against you, you said to me, no, but a king shall reign over us, although the Lord your God was your king. Now therefore...
No, that's good. No, that's good. So, something positive here. These individuals should have volunteered for that first, Mike, and all those names.
Yeah.
But he sent you all these individuals. Those were judges. Okay, he sent all the judges to you. But then what? What's the lesson that Samuel's drawing for them here? You still didn't do the right thing. You still neglected God. So, how's this history lesson going if you were in the audience? How do you feel about what he's saying there? Hmm?
You haven't learned it.
Yeah. We say they haven't learned anything. Yeah, yeah. History is kind of, you guys just keep doing the same thing. What is wrong with you? Verses 16 through 18.
Now
One last year. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, that's fine.
16 through 18.
Now then, stand still and see this great thing the Lord is about to do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest now? I will call upon the Lord to send thunder and rain, and you will realize what an evil thing you did in the eyes of the Lord when you asked for a king. Then Samuel called upon the Lord, and that same day the Lord sent thunder and rain. So all the people stood in awe of the Lord and of Samuel.
This is, I think I mentioned this in the book, this is every preacher's dream response, isn't it? You know, I say something and God just confirms it with all this noise and lightning and thunder, and it's like, yeah, man, let's... What was that doing? I mean, that thunder and lightning there just represented what? It represented the fact that you guys blew it again. It was a demonstration of God's power and of the evil that you did. Boy, talk about feeling negative, you know, when you're through listening to that little history lesson. But let's not forget verse 25. Actually, verse 22. Verse 21 and 22. Don't turn away from following worthless things that can't profit or rescue you. They are worthless. The Lord will not abandon his people because of his great name and because he has determined to make you his own people. So I'm not even sure how to ask a question here as much as what I'm thinking is, Do we often think that in the Old Testament there's no representation of grace? You know, we often think of grace coming in the New Testament, don't we? And, you know, it's certainly more clearly defined and thought out and represented in the New Testament. Is this God's grace here in the Old Testament?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure it is. All this stuff you guys did, guess what? God's still with you. He still wants you to be his people. Now, Samuel gives them the final warning here in verse 25. If you continue to do what is evil, both you and your king will be swept away. Not unusual. Deuteronomy 11, Joshua 24, they both of those passages in the Old Testament do the same thing. They give a history lesson, then they warn them, guys, just stick with it. Don't get caught going the other direction. Question. Why is it difficult to change? That's question 4 in the book, by the way. Something like it.
You have fear of the unknown.
Fear of the unknown. Interesting. Takes effort? Why would you say fear of the unknown?
Because you don't know what path. If you always go down the same path, you know what's on that path. You take a new path, you don't. It could be something great or it could be something horrible. But the path you know what to expect.
Yeah. Even if it's bad, it's somehow comfortable, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. And you said, Margaret, what did you say again?
It takes effort.
Takes effort.
It's
Jim?
a lot of dedication and discipline.
Dedication and discipline. Ooh. Yeah, Jim.
And I think it wounds your ego. If you have the right, you think you have the right plan, somebody else has one opposite. You can't change because of your ego.
Okay, that's kind of interesting. Why do you think it was so hard for Israel? Yeah, Larry.
Well, in verse 19, after the history lesson and after the thundering and everything, the people actually kind of started with a clean slate. They prayed to Sam, they asked Samuel to pray for them because we realized by asking for this king, we could add to all of our other things we talked about.
Yeah. He doesn't shy away from reminding them that this was a bad thing you asked for. You got it, but it was still not a good thing. Still not a good thing. But yet, God still wants you to be his people. That's, to me, that is consistently the amazing thing throughout all of this history here. Whether we have enough time to kind of go into this. Chapter 13 really represents Saul's initial failure. Okay. But is there any thoughts that you would like to add to our discussion on the past and how that affects us? What we should do to make sure a new generation remembers important events of the past. Yes, thank you.
Bob, last night when I read this section of scripture, right, verse 14 really stuck out to me because so
Verse
often
14 of chapter 12.
Verse 14 of chapter 12, because Samuel places an enormous responsibility on the people themselves. You know, he says, "You will fear if you will fear the Lord and serve Him and listen to His voice and not rebel against the command of the Lord, then both you and also the king who reigns over you." So often we take pot shots at the evil kings of Israel, right? But I think you know, we can't just blame the leaders of Israel. We really need to place the blame where it belongs on the people themselves who worshipped idols in every high location. The lesson from that for us today is for us to recognize what are the idols we're carrying around from our past, from whatever it might be, and we let go all of that because that's what the Lord wants, and we follow Him wholeheartedly.
1 Corinthians 10, Paul makes that very point. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Rick, you had your hand up.
So, you know, we've talked about people that influenced us and the past, and, you know, I think a lot of times, and we talk about change, and so those people that influence, we look at them and we say, well, they can't be wrong. So we're going to follow down their path and we're going to mimic who and what they are. Maybe put our own little spin on it, but which just emphasizes the incredible influence people, you know, we as parents raising our children, are we mimicking behavior that God would be pleased with, or and that they have a pattern to follow, or is it quite the opposite? So.
Okay. And that's really the whole point here, isn't it? Looking at the past, how has it influenced us? Has it influenced us for good or evil? Are we still following some traditions that are leading us the wrong direction? Okay, for some reason Israel could not break the spell of idolatry. We can probably go into great detail in figuring out why, but we know that it was. It was just one of the things that kept happening to it. Yeah, I think Jim had his hand up first, I think.
I don't know if anybody else in here watched that series by Ken Burns on country music. I hope this is germane, but I think the whole theme of it, by the time they finished it up, was the old is, for so long, every new artist came along wanted their own thing, and it almost changed to pop music for a while, but gradually they began to see that new is not always good and old is not always bad, and they kind of melted the two together and embraced, and it showed some of the newer artists going to the oldest guys that are just about to die, and will you teach me these chords and so forth, and I think that's kind of what you can do.
Okay, valuing the past, valuing what's good about the past, and what's been handed down to us. Yeah, right here.
Someone said that if we forget the past, we're destined to make the same mistakes. And I think that's what Israel continually did. They forgot the past and they made the same mistakes. And so, you know, it's important for us to, God tells us not to dwell on the past, but it's important to remember the past and try not to make the same mistakes they did, and incorporate the good we can out of it. But we have to remember what has been done, or we're going to do the same thing again.
And this is our history too, isn't it? This is not just the history of Israel. This is our history. This is the history of God's people. Okay, so it's certainly good lessons for us to learn. Let me just maybe try to make a little bit of a segue into next week very quickly. In chapter 13, Samuel makes a observation, let's call it, about Saul. And it seemed to me, as I've read this, it seems a little premature that he would say, you're not going to be the king for very long. You know, he's already looking for somebody else. In chapter 13, remember what he does in chapter 13? Yeah, he offers the sacrifice too soon. You know, if you look at the military situation, it felt like I got to do something here. You know, these guys are pressing upon us. They got more guys than we do, and they're bigger than we are, and they got more weapons than we do. I got to do something here. So he does it he does it on his own, and Samuel shows up, you know, soon. But Samuel says to him, you know what? That was a bad thing. You didn't obey God's command, so you're out. It's like that seemed a little premature to me. But I want you to think about that as we get into the next couple of chapters, where we see Saul's behavior is very much the same in the next couple of chapters. So let's think about the reasons why Saul turned out to be unfit. And to me, this is one of the great mysteries of this whole thing. Why did God choose Saul to begin with if he knew this was going to happen? Maybe I'm opening up a question you didn't have. I'm not sure, but that's the kind of questions I had. Well, it seemed like he should have chose David first. Now, why didn't he get David first? But then we got this, all the rest of 1 Samuel is what? It's this battle between David and Saul. That's all it is. The whole rest of the book is about David versus Saul. So we're going to take a look in some detail about why, chapters 13 and 14. We're going to take a look specifically about what was it about Saul that God was so displeased with that he said, sorry, it's just not going to happen to you anymore. Chapters 14 and 15. Final questions, comments? That's all I, yeah,
You
go ahead,
know,
Rick.
on that segue, I couldn't help but just focus on the fact that here's Samuel saying, you made a mistake with this king thing. And Saul's hearing this and thinking, what in the world's going on?
Yeah, he's in the audience, you know, he's listening to all this as well. And yet, it's very clear from the previous chapters, isn't it? God put all this string of events together to demonstrate Saul's the guy. Put all that together, Saul's the guy. So, anyway. I think the next section is theologically really rich. So, look forward to it next week. Thank you. Appreciate your discussion, by the way. Keep it up.